Hi, I'm Gene Bergman, Ward 2 City Councilor, and I'm here with some friends to talk on Burlington Progressives TV. And as we were just saying, it is a great time to be alive. If only for the interesting times that we live, as the Chinese have cursed us out with. And tonight, we're here to talk about the solidarity economy. And we'll get into what that's about, but sort of why are we talking about this on a Burlington TV show? Well, affordability, oligarchy, the growing gap between the rich and the rest of us, big news. There were elections, big elections on both coasts that got elected to mayors in New York City and Seattle, Democratic Socialists. We've got in Vermont, surprise, surprise, a housing crisis, school consolidation, which really implicates all of our economies, and tax reform. So the question that it poses really is, what is the economy that we need? What kind of economy? And I'm old enough to remember, and sometimes I spit when I use her name, Margaret Thatcher, and she said, there is no alternative to neoliberalism and the austerity that it brings. But tonight, I am here to try to tell us, to try to help us work through the fact that there is another world possible. And it includes what we do here in Vermont, what we do here in Burlington. So I am joined, I'm really blessed, I thank you guys, to be blessed with Matt Kropp, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. Hi, Matt.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thank you. And Michelle Edelman McCormick, who is the Director of Cooperation Vermont.
Thank you. And
Audrey Grant, the Co-Director of the Northeast Kingdom Organizing Committee, or just organizing? That's the way.
Northeast Kingdom Organizing.
There we go.
Nico, I know.
Nico, that's great. And how about we start with you, Michelle, to just sort of start us off with a brief description of what a solidarity economy is, and we'll even have a slide to put on the screen, and then after we work through that, we'll get to talk about what each of your organizations does, and because you guys are doing amazing work, and that's my job, is to try to let you get a little bit broader airtime on that.
Yeah, thank you. So on that tip, though, in terms of amazing work, I would be remiss if I didn't just state, affirmatively how important this space is, and independent media, especially in these times, but kind of like always, but how precious it's become and how rare in these times it has become. And so like for Vermonters to really hone in on how important our public radio stations are and our public television actually is, and for each of us to be thinking about ways in which we can help to provide mutual aid, financial, labor, otherwise, to support the continuation of this work in this space.
I just got to say, as somebody who was there, like at the beginning, this came because Bernie said to what was then Adelphia Cable, we are going to fight you tooth and nail unless you give us some money to do. We're going to start our own television show.
Yeah.
And as a result, we got some money, and this whole process has happened. It's been going on for a long time.
And we have to fight to maintain it, because we can't take anything for granted. Never could, but especially not now. Yeah. So with that, though, the solidarity economy, the first thing I want to really share with people is to direct them to the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, USCEN, which is an organization, an organizing effort to help, disseminate information about the solidarity economy. If you go to this website, there's so much information and so many resources. And then we have gatherings regionally and then nationally, and a bunch of working groups that are happening online as well to help network people who are working in the solidarity economy framework. And so that really is, if you want to get much more in depth on that.
Is that UR?
Yeah, so that QR code right there, and USCEN, that's their logo, so you know that you're in the right spot. I really want to direct people, to that, but just really in brief so we can launch the conversation. using their words, so I'm not, right, making stuff up because I do that. Solidarity economy transforms oppressive systems by fostering a just, sustainable, and equitable future rooted in cooperative economics, democratic governance, and ecological balance. USN, which is the organization, challenges capitalism, advances a post-capitalist vision, and focused on systems of solidarity, care, and sustainability. And so within, a solidarity economy framework, there are lots of different examples of things that already exist. Worker cooperatives, mutual aid, kinds of food cooperatives, community gardens, housing cooperatives, real estate cooperatives, lending libraries, tool lending libraries, community land trusts. There are all kinds of things that fall within a solidarity economy framework.
Okay. And
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, this is also something that's happening internationally. I see there are things
Absolutely.
like the Democracy Collaborative has got work happening in the UK, big work happening in Scotland and in Wales. You've got the Mondragon system in the Basque region of Spain, which is now maybe a century old.
Absolutely. And so that it is really important to know that the Solidarity Economy Network itself is happening all over the world, and that USN just represents our organizing efforts within the United States.
So let's pivot to your guys' work and start, and let's just continue with you in terms of
Okay.
the work that Cooperation Vermont is doing in the solidarity economy.
Yes. So Cooperation Vermont was founded as a sister organization to Cooperation Jackson out of Jackson, Mississippi, and it was co-founded with myself and Kalia Kuno to advance a solidarity economy framework, project here within this bioregion. And why that is so important is the location for us is that we both come from organizing spaces in the South where we have been watching. We both did serious organizing work in New Orleans after Katrina, and kind of opened our eyes in a very different and real way about what climate change is bringing, and capital's response, and our government, who currently represents the interests of capital, their response to those moments are. And I think that we've seen a lot more of that. So, in looking at where the climate change is generationally is going to be bringing us, and also the rise of both, fascist and neo-Confederate forces, particularly within the South at the time, where are people going to actually be able to be in the generations to come? So it's much more of a longitudinal approach in what are the seeds that we need to plant today for future generations. And all of that has really escalated, I might add, within the last several years, faster than, even somebody who's been kind of predicting and was kind of, seen oftentimes as a doom and what's the word?
Gloom. Doom
Doom
and
and gloom person, like, oh my gosh, here she goes again. And now I'm like, but okay. Yeah, apparently. But, with being that said, right, what we have done as it relates to the solidarity economy piece of things is that within Marshfield, we have been trying to use as many tools of a solidarity economy as is possible in one geographic area, and very intentionally thread them together. So while a land trust is something that represents efforts within a solidarity economy, while a worker cooperative does, while a community garden does, or a mutual aid project does, there are few instances where those things are actually in a geographic area very intentionally working together to start to create an actual economic system. So that is what we are trying to do. We have established the Cooperation Vermont Community Land Trust that has focused on two things, three so far, which is decommodifying key community spaces that otherwise would have been on the speculative market. Marshfield is a place that is really fortunate to still have a town commons that we definitely cherish. But some of the key other community spaces, like the Marshfield Village Store, for instance, was purchased and then brought into the Community Land Trust and the Rainbow Suites building.
I know Bill and
Yes.
Trish, like since the 70s. I love them.
I mean, absolutely amazing human beings, and have continued that legacy that they, of organizing work and just, the work that they have done their whole life by bringing the building into the land trust so that it could in perpetuity continue to be used to support this work and the community. And then some, units of permanently affordable worker housing. And then the Elder Land Share Project, which is an effort to decommodify more land as well, so that as our elders are aging and want to remain in age in place, right? It becomes really difficult for folks to age in place in a rural environment for all the reasons. And so this is a program where no two situations are going to look the same, but basically to bring the land itself into the land trust so that it doesn't end up on the speculative market as, folks generationally, we pass on.
Yeah, we do.
That is what we do as human beings. But to be able to do that with, grace and dignity and comfort in our home, in the places that we've loved. And at the same time, to be able to bring in very intentionally a new generation of land stewards who can learn from our elders about stewarding that land, and maybe people who have farmed elsewhere that don't farm in Vermont. It is different, right? If you're farming in, say, Mississippi or any place else, there may be some core competencies, but it is different here in Vermont. But to be able to learn and the transference of that knowledge, and at the same time be able to provide a community level of care to elders who are trying to age in place, not CNAs, not skilled nursing, but like literally somebody who lives on your land with you and is able to know that you're okay or when you're not, and help get to and fro doctor's appointments, community levels of care. So that's that piece of things. So that's the land decommodification piece. And then developing worker cooperatives. So we converted the Marshfield Village store, which is a general store and a deli, into a worker-owned cooperative. And we're developing a new cooperative for the Rainbow Suites building, which we still have to renovate to bring it up to code. And it's a lot of work and all the things, but we're getting there. So those are the cooperatives that are worker-owned businesses. And then we have the mutual aid work, where we have the Marshfield, and it's not just a Cooperation Vermont thing, it's a community-based thing. That is the Marshfield Resilience Hub, where we're doing a lot of this mutual aid work that sprung out of the flooding in 2023, where our town was completely forgotten. The state didn't even know that we didn't have running water or sewage for like almost 2 weeks. And we were on our own, and we did it, and we took care of ourselves. But out of that organizing energy, the Resilience Hub has sprung, and we have a farmers market through the season and weekly skill shares that are free to participants, where it could be anything from a stop the bleed training to how do you cold can. And then we have swaps that are themed, back to school equipment or tools, that kind of thing. A tool lending library. We're doing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But community production is another thing that we are moving into as well, that I would be remiss, because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. You can always follow up with me. But I don't want to miss the community production piece, because one of the things that we are working on is relocalizing production. And we think that digital fabrication, most people think about 3D printing, but that's not the extent of it, right? But the technology is there between our capacity to source local materials and the technology that exists. It is there for us to be able to relocalize production. And it's this really critical juncture, like so many technological advances, that if we don't democratize access to the technology and access of the knowledge of the technology, then it's just going to pass us by, and it'll be another wave of technological evolution that they promise is going to make our lives better, but
Techno-feudalism.
That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really, so that's a really important point, right? It's like capital is in crisis, right? Period. It is evolving. It is in its own crisis right now, and alternatives are being proposed on our behalf. And techno-feudalism is one of those alternatives that is wrangling and posturing and may be in evolution. What are the solutions that we are creating on behalf of the working class, in our communities? What is the economy that we want, that we are deciding democratically that we want for our children and future generations to be living under?
That is a great point and segue. And so Marshfield is on the road to St. Jay. Okay.
It is.
It is. It's on the road.
Most definitely.
It's on the road to St. Jay, and here we are in Burlington, which is great that we're out of Burlington, though Matt is a Burlingtonian. But let's talk to Audrey here, who's from the Kingdom.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Kingdom.
Yeah. Okay. So just for folks that might not fully know, the Northeast Kingdom is the 3 most northeast counties in Vermont. They're the most rural, some of the highest poverty rates in the state, also some of the highest disaster declarations, same with Washington County there. And so Northeast Kingdom organizing really came out of this project from the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick, where they are really focused on food systems, but they were starting to notice that there was a lot of other comorbid issues along with food systems. And through that, they did a listening campaign and built this kind of second organization to really focus on what are the most emerging needs in the most rural communities in the state, and how can we really embolden Kingdom residents to take a hold of their future, to the same thing with Michelle's point of what is our goal and how are we going to try to build that. And so NICO in its current form, we have 2 campaigns around social connection and housing. They were voted on by our members. You have to live, work, or be part of a faith community in the Northeast Kingdom to be a NICO member. And our members really focused on social connection post-COVID. It was an incredibly isolating time, even more isolating for folks that don't have access to technology, who there are still lots of places without Wi-Fi or cell phone service in the Kingdom. And so really focusing on that social connection for how are we intentionally bringing people together. And then we also have this housing campaign. As we know, Vermont has a housing crisis. It is really affecting, the effects are being felt in the Northeast Kingdom, specifically because of rules around zoning. We're a very rural place, and there's a lot of Act 250 regulations, and then Act 181 is trying to fix it, but might not, whatever. So there's a lot of questions about land use in the Kingdom. There's a lot of questions about building housing that actually makes the most sense for its community that it's serving. That's a really big issue. Not all housing is the same, not all housing is equal or just. You actually do need to look at the effects of the housing on the community, and I'm not in a NIMBY way, just in a way that if you don't have a sewer system to take on 20 units, don't build 20 units there, sorry. Stuff like that. So thinking more intentionally about housing. And then through that came flood recovery through both of those campaigns. So in 2023 and 2024, and parts of 2025, NICO was boots on the ground in the Northeast Kingdom. In 2024, we mucked and gutted 450 homes, mobilized 600 volunteers, really all on our own, using information that we had learned from, figuring it out in 2023. Through that, we were able to start our long-term recovery group, CURVE, Kingdom United Resilience and Recovery Effort. And they're a really close partner in this kind of work too. And part of this end goal is building these resilience hubs across the Northeast Kingdom. So similar to Marshfield, but in more municipalities across the Kingdom.
And is that a map with those places?
Yes, yeah. So
maybe Kevin, we can get up. There you go. Okay. Holy cow.
So these are our 8 spots where we're going to really build out these resilience hubs. We have a really, really strong one in Barton. We have a really strong one in Hardwick, but the 6 other locations need a lot more resources, and that's part of our next phase of this organizing. So these are communities that were affected in the flooding, specifically in 2024, and then Barton and Orleans in 2023, although there was, of course, overlap for sure. And really the goal is to build really, really strong social connection and build this framework for how do people come together in times of crisis by having them come together in sunny skies. So that looks like for us community meals, that looks like mutual aid response. So we work really closely with the Barn Giving Garden, and they grow food locally that then gets used in our community meal. We're really focused on skilling up leaders. One of NICO's core tenets is, Kingdom residents know clearly and closely the issues that they're facing. So why are we not empowering them to solve the crisis? And a lot of that is, due to income inequality, and folks just don't have the time or the capacity and the money to become and to be the leaders that they need. And so part of that, that mutual aid is really, really important to empower people financially to become leaders too. So on the second half of the graphic, really quick, you can also see these kind of our projects of survival is what we're kind of calling this umbrella term for why these resilience hubs are so important. That's to Michelle's framework, this build fight. So how are we building these survival projects? And we specifically use this term survival because we're literally talking about people's ability to survive. Literally talking about your ability to survive. And so through that, we're really focused on meeting the material needs. So that's the mutual aid, that's the mucking and gutting of homes, that's the community meals, the food pantry we run. And then it's also, the spiritual and social and emotional needs too, where how are you coming together and sharing a meal is both filling your stomach, but also filling your soul, So how are we kind of doing both constantly at the same time? So that's kind of our overview of our resilience hubs. It's a much broader scale, of course, and one of the things we're really doing is building really strong relationships in these communities to empower the community members to kind of take it on. So what does it look like for them to also learn from Hardwick and Barton and Marshfield to then build that in their own community?
At the end of the day, no Messiah is going to save us.
Yeah.
And so the effectiveness that we've got is based on our ability to help people realize their own skills and their own talents and their own opportunities, and then to bring those together. It sounds like there are these synergies that are happening, which is pretty exciting. When I think about things, so we're in this building here, but down the street is what is now the community health centers of Vermont, or I guess Burlington, actually. Though that came from the People's Free Clinic. Actually, it's a direct result of people organizing a survival program to provide free health in the early 1970s. I actually worked at a community organization in the space right next to, in the same storefront as the People's Free Clinic. And they were my doctor, and we did housing and welfare rights and job worker rights stuff, and then we created a food co-op there. So all that stuff was happening then, and all of these co-ops, are a result of many more than a century of operation that's happening. So
can I just say too, to that point, no Messiah, there's no one person is going to solve this, no one singular person. And so one of the things that I'm really cautious about throughout all of this work is how do we make sure that these systems continue to exist if NICO stopped existing? Yeah. And especially right now, the lack of the cutting of grants, the costs are going up. Yeah. We need to be really cautious about putting too much emphasis on organizations, myself included. And so part of this work, especially with these resilience hubs, is constantly asking ourselves, will this system continue to exist if NICO stops existing? To that point too, one of Vermont's largest economic systems right now is the nonprofit industry. And NICO is a nonprofit. So, pot calling the kettle black, but we as a state push a lot of the actual work towards nonprofits who are now holding all of these really crucial pieces and taking care of community members in a really serious way, because the state has also kind of abdicated that responsibility. And again, love the nonprofit sector. It is a system that we need, and how do we also think and imagine, again, what is the actual system that we're wanting to work towards, especially if we're starting to see more and more nonprofits crumble because of the failures of federal funding especially. How are we making sure that this work will continue? Because there are people who will not survive if they start to lose these nonprofits that are providing crucial resources to the communities, especially in rural areas. Yeah. anyway, I could keep going about that forever.
I mean, absolutely, and the connections that we in the biggest city in Vermont have, or the similarities, and the folks in the Kingdom or in Marshfield are real, because we rely on a state system for homelessness or houselessness and mental health and drug, all of those issues that we have here that people conflate with public safety, right? And we rely on that third sector, and we basically say, we can't do it, government can't do it, we close our eyes, and some people turn around and walk away and then blame other folks for letting the problem go. But the resources, right, are critically important. And we'll talk a little bit, assuming that we have time, which I think we will have ample time, to talk about the role of government and taxation and that in that new system. But let's turn. We've talked about co-ops and employee ownership is something which is akin to a cooperative venture, and Matt, you and I are co-cooperators in a community building around the corner from my house, the 88 Oak Street, which is wonderful because it's turned a building which was a store that went out of business and some apartments into something with a vital neighborhood hub, which also has affordable housing as part of it. And our mission to try to do it right is always a challenge, when you're in that. So Matt, talk to us about the Vermont Employee Ownership Center and all of the work that's happening in Vermont, because you span the entire state, you include Burlington here, and that includes then the work that's happening elsewhere.
So I can I think there's maybe two pieces to go for, but I think there's a little bit of background that can be helpful. So the Vermont Employee Ownership Center has been around since 2001. We were the second employee ownership center in the country, and we're directly modeled after the one in Ohio that's been around since the 80s. The mission is promote and foster broad-based employee ownership for a laundry list of social impacts. We define broad-based employee ownership as forms of ownership where everyone who works full-time in a business has a path to becoming a co-owner of that business, right? So it's not just stock options, it's not just a handful of managers owning the business, but it's everyone who works there as a mechanism for generating wealth, building more stable companies and communities, et cetera. So worker cooperatives fall under that umbrella, right? Employee stock ownership plan companies, employee ownership trusts. So there's kind of and then there's a few kind of very unique things like Chroma Technologies in Bellows Falls, which is its own, roll your own kettle of fish. But the core work for us is primarily around ownership succession. So we're, us in Maine are constantly in a race for being the oldest demographically oldest state in the country. And the question of, the succession of businesses, and particularly businesses in rural areas where the loss of a key anchor employer could be devastating, is something that is heavily motivating in our work. And so a lot of practically my work is first, making sure that business owners are aware of this as an option for if they're like, oh, do I liquidate? Do I sell to an outsider? My kids don't want to take it over. Who could own it after me? Your workers could own it after you. And then past that education is supporting folks through the process, right? And depending on the type of ownership that's being used, that process looks different in terms of like how employees are engaged and other things like that. But really there's kind of three core pieces, questions that need to be answered as people go through the process of transitioning to being owned by their workers. The first is the question of how folks are going to own the business together, right? Which is something where oftentimes the relationships in the organization, when you have command and control systems, are mediated by that person at the top. And so, can folks imagine being in a peer ownership relationship at the ownership level and understanding how that might differ from being in the operational level, and what are the rules of the road? So there's that kind of work through that practically looks like bylaws and other things like that. Then there's actually understanding what is it that we're going to own together. So most people who might know a lot about their particular part of the business but don't necessarily really have a good picture of how does this fit together as an economic machine in its totality. And so working on business planning, oftentimes in collaboration with that retiring business owner, is an important thing so, okay, you want me to buy this, what is it you want me to buy? And then the final piece, and this is something that then I think can, applies to a lot of this, where's the money going to come from, right? Because there's a certain sort of pump priming element to this of, if this is one mechanism for giving people who don't have, the money to make money, right? They have their labor, they have their work, to give folks the opportunity to earn, the equity in the place that they work, the value that's being generated as part of purely just from bringing their labor to the table. How do you get to the point where that they can afford to buy the business? Now, the low-hanging fruit are those business owners who are highly motivated and are willing to be the bank, right? To be paid out over time for the value of the business, out of the profits of the business. It's a small segment of the total, and so a big piece of the work that's long-term is how do you create financing mechanisms, pools of capital that can not be sort of seeking market rate returns, but have a mission to them, and that mission being oriented and understanding the nature of what does a worker buyout need and look like. And so one of the things when I talk to peers in other parts of the country that we do have a bit of an advantage in this region is the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast has been around for 50 plus years. Started off as a fund that was food co-ops lending their extra money to each other in the 1970s. And it's now to the point where they can make a loan without requiring personal guarantees on the part of the workers who might be only bringing a tiny percentage of the sale price of the business to the table. Their maximum loan size is now $2.5 million, which in the grand scheme of business, right, we need to scale that up another order of magnitude or two. But that means that there's a whole slew of these kind of small to medium-sized Vermont businesses where if the owner can say, oh, I'll maybe seller finance 25%, and I can walk away from the table with 3/4 of that to fund my retirement, that's something that feels reasonable and doable to a much larger slice of the total population of businesses in Vermont.
Right.
And so really kind of like making sure that we have those kinds of strategic resources that can then support folks in making that final step to the business becoming employee owned.
It goes to the question of what is the system that we want to build, because we're not just individual entities that are just floating out there, but we work within a system of finance and rules and regulations like the development rules. So how many firms or companies are employee owned, if you use the broadest sense of the term?
In Vermont, our count is somewhere around 20 to 25 worker co-ops and 35 to 40 employee stock ownership plan companies that are headquartered in Vermont, with some other national companies that have a presence here.
So, and you have an idea of the number of workers that are involved in that?
It's a few thousand. The majority of them being in the ESOPs, as they tend to be bigger companies. So you have like Karis Reels down in Rutland, or King Arthur Baking Company, and other things like that are, I think the biggest one of those that, the biggest is PC Construction, which used to be Pizzagalli Construction, which is, depending on how the economy is, usually between 600 and 900 workers.
Right. We will not talk about the history of union busting that the Pizzagalli company engaged in the early 1970s.
I have no doubt.
To kill the construction worker unions, but it's good that they were able to do that. So this is a fairly small segment of the population, but it does provide us with an supporting organization and a model that is not minuscule, if you look at it, that says that another way of doing things is possible. And in terms of the way that people engage with the firms, I mean, I've worked for, just standard production companies. I was in the print industry for a while, right, as a production camera operator. So I just, the place that workers have in the management and in the division of labor and in all of the intellectual aspects of running a business talk a little bit about that, because part of what we're trying to do is say that you're more than just running, you know, a machine just over and over and over again. You've got a lot of skill there, so we want to make sure to
Well,
realize that.
First want to hear your thoughts after having been involved in Marshfield Village Store work for a few years on that, and then I'll
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, ours was, I would say, a little bit, no, definitely an atypical example, because to Matt's explanation of like the work of VIOC, worker cooperatives typically start with either a group of people who either do similar work or complementary work coming together and deciding to start a business, and they're like, hey, let's start a business, we'll be the owners, and we'll operate it as a worker-owned cooperative, and they go forth from there. Or you have a business that maybe had a family, maybe a corporate model, but there's an existing business that is either going up for sale, or the owners are retiring, and then there's an opportunity for the workers to then purchase the existing business and then to operate it as a worker-owned cooperative. And so two things to differentiate us. One is what we found was that there was a lot of, so what makes us different is that we were a group of folks that came in and bought a business and said, we're converting this to a worker-owned cooperative. People were like, what's that? Right? Like and then there was a bit of a confusion in the community when they heard the word cooperative, because then there was the assumption that it was going to become like the Plainfield Cooperative or the Hardwick or like Hunger Mount in Montpelier, and it was going to take that shape and model and become like a member cooperative, which are great, and they serve important functions. And I will always, especially the Plainfield Cooperative, wow, what an evolution. And I mean, they've been there and holding, that space around local food sovereignty for so long. And the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast was really helpful in helping them to move into that new space and take, on a new life, a new phase of their existence. And so I just wanted to give shout outs to my local folks in the cooperative economics space. But for us, it was the explaining to people that a worker-owned cooperative is that the workers are the owners of the cooperative, and there are lots of different ways that can be configured. But the key importance to that is that it is a democratic process for how that is configured, right? The workers are exhibiting and able to assert some self-determination in how the business actually functions and how profits are either reserved or dispersed, and the fundamental functions of operating the business is that democratic component. And for us, it is the model where the workers are the ones who are benefiting from their labor. Like the profits go to the actual workers, rather than a model that most of us are used to, where others are benefiting from the excess value of our labor, which is otherwise being exploited for the profit and gain of somebody else. And then even worse, right? Almost never do those dollars actually stay within our community. Yep. They go off, and then they go offshore often. And they go off into like who knows where, somebody's yacht, right? Until an orca, shout out to Orca Media, orca whale knocks them over. But that being said, when we invest in our local cooperatives, be they member cooperatives or worker-owned cooperatives, and we, do business in that way, those dollars are circulating within our own communities and helping to support our economic development overall in a way that is regenerative.
Yeah, this is a really big fight. Anybody who has paid attention to what's happened in Preston in the UK has seen there is this big fight around just keeping procurement dollars from the big institutions and the government local, because they go to the south, to London, right, to the city. This is just this giant drain. And so part of the community wealth building model is exactly that. It's building your local economy so that you build community wealth. And that's what I hear. So Matt, you just heard Michelle give a short
Yeah.
on that.
So I think, the experience that I, see here, talk to folks about, we just, October is Employee Ownership Month and Co-op Month, so I had a bunch of, opportunities to sit with people from different parts of companies and in some peer groups, which was always really, really great. But I think it's the sort of thing where, ownership, we have this dominant culture of how employment works, right? And how people relate to their jobs. And everyone's had this sort of like initial shitty job at the grocery store or wherever it was you cut your teeth on, alienated employment, right? And so there's oftentimes some level of kind of like unlearning and relearning that needs to happen. And it can be something where, and this is one of those things where we're not talking about, total utopias, right? These are practical working businesses. And so, some places where it can fall down, right, is where the business doesn't have an effective way of doing that education and bringing people into, all right, this is how this work happens, and this is how your efforts come back to you and come back and benefit the whole group. The companies that do have intentional approaches to that see huge benefits from it, right? Where, if it's something where you have line of sight to understanding the books of the business, having financial education, feeling like you have real stake and say in how the work happens. There are lots of opportunities, big and small, for people to intervene and run the business better and run it in a way where they feel, pride in what they're doing. I remember talking to a hardware store worker cooperative, and they talked about how before they converted, they would receive these pallets of inventory, and the pallets of inventory needed to be inspected for broken things that they would get credit for from the manufacturer in the next shipment. Before they became employee owned, it was something where if a pallet was broken, it would be reported. After they became employee owned, people were going through and being like, all right, this pallet has 3 broken tiles on it. This pallet has, right? So it was a much more fine-grained thing because that was their stuff now, right? And so when employee ownership really sort of succeeds in that sort of, not just the financial side, but the cultural side, the sort of lived experience side, that there's that shift in mindset and relationship both to the company and also to the coworkers.
Yeah. I mean, you've got it's a challenge in a society where, it's just foreign to have ownership over your work, ownership over your community, over the buildings in your neighborhood and whatever.
And the one other thing is actually that sort of redefining ownership, right? Because I think when most people do experience ownership, it's a highly individualized thing, where it's I own my car. I can lend my car, I can sell my car, I can rent my car, but it's I who's making those decisions. Versus really kind of understanding, I own it, but I own it together with others. Yeah. And what are those sorts of responsibilities and what comes with that kind of relationship that many people really don't have around the control of meaningfully valuable things?
Yeah. Solidarity. I mean, that's why we call it solidarity.
And I would say in many instances, I would take that a step further, right? In so much as that we deter, like even within a worker-owned cooperative, like in the case of the Marshfield Village store where the workers, but before I make that point, the education, the re-education piece and the re-enculturation, whatever that is a huge thing because we are so on a cellular level just conditioned and beaten down by the current system of capitalism that it's almost it's really difficult for people to even imagine and then to start to live and to do. And so the best way that we have found is by getting people involved in the actual doing of it, and then the education piece as well needs to still formally happen. And we've been leaning on the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, and we've got a bunch of folks who are in their cooperative boot camp right now that takes them everything from the basic political economy framework for what is the solidarity economy to this is what a pro forma looks like and why.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. This is what marketing means and why. From the actual business nuts and bolts, business school 101, if you will, from a worker cooperative framework. Really important because we have to democratize, the information about the business itself in order for it to actually run democratically.
And it's really hard work. I'm a member of the Mad River Glen cooperative. We actually have got an opportunity to buy some land that we actually have been using that's owned by the former owner. And it is a lot of money, right? And it's a really tough decision. And we haven't made that decision yet. And you can see, you know, the tension in terms of that decision making, but it requires at least a certain number of people, a significant number, not necessarily everybody, who are very committed to making it happen and have those values, and then also have leadership. And there are all these pieces that need to come together, because you don't really have the culture reinforcing it to give you that. We're talking about this challenge. It's a cultural challenge. What are the other challenges that you all are facing? Audrey, in the Kingdom?
Yeah, I mean, I actually want to speak really quick to that culture point too. I, as much as it is absolutely like an issue of culture and like this, like what is the dominant narrative, what are the dominant ideas, I do think that, and I don't want to necessarily get into Vermont exceptionalism, but I do think that Vermont already has a very strong value of mutual aid, although I don't know if folks would call it that. I'm really thinking about, like, especially, there's something about living in a place that is as cold as Vermont's that really brings people together to understand the stakes. And I'm thinking about, like, if you see someone on the side of the road, like, you're gonna pull over and just be like, hey, are you okay? Like, you're already always kind of looking as like, okay, who's okay? Who maybe needs to be brought in more? Who is on the fringes, and how can we like bring them into this? There's already kind of this mentality. And I think about how like the Adamant Food Co-op is one of the oldest cooperatives in the country. I just learned that today. Like, we already have so many institutions that are already doing this work. It's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. But I think to that point, the challenge is money. Like, the thing we're trying to fight is also the reason why it's so hard to do it. Who knew? But I think that's one of the things that Nico is really saying. I mean, we're a member-led organization and we have membership dues, but that's only covers so much of our work.
How many members, by the way?
I think in 2025, we have, 80 dues-paying members, individuals, and then we have multiple organizations that are members as well. And for the Northeast Kingdom, oh yeah, look at these photos. Oh my gosh. So these are so many of our Barton leaders, and these are folks who live in, so Barton, Vermont has a poverty rate around 30%. Vermont's average is 10%, for some context. Barton has 3 municipal boards, which is a challenge in and of itself. Yeah. And specifically in Barton Village, where we do a lot of organizing, there are a lot of folks that are elders, a lot of people with disabilities, and a lot of folks that, you know, just to this point, like, are always on the fringes. And so one of the things we really intentionally do is bring these folks in who are constantly being left out of the decision-making process, and really giving them a voice and saying, like, you know, we're even talking about like Nico's mission, vision, and values. We're running that by like the folks we're organizing with, being like, does this language actually make sense to you? Because if it doesn't make sense to you, the people we're trying to organize, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter anymore. But I think all of that is undercurrent. The undercurrent is always money and income, and how are you balancing your budget and stuff like that. And I think, I mean, the cuts at the federal level are absolutely an issue in that, but I do think that there's constantly been this underlying issue that no one's been able to address until the Band-Aid got ripped off, and we're all seeing what's actually underneath. Is like, this system was always going to fail in this way. Capitalism was always going to fail in this way. We're just now feeling the effects of it because we have a man in office who has decided to really rip the Band-Aid off. Yeah. But like, there were already nonprofits that were struggling to do this work. There have been people that have been struggling to do this work for decades and centuries even. Like, as much as I'm like, this is our problem, it was also a chance for us to think outside of this system that was destined to fail.
Yeah. I would take that a step further, and I would say it's not a failure of the system. I really don't think so. I mean, I think the system is operating exactly the way that it was designed to. Like, it is a system that was always, from the jump, from its inception, and has just gotten more and more sophisticated about it. It is designed on extraction and exploitation of both people and the planet, period. It's not failing. It's grinding right along. And when I say that it's in crisis right now, it's like how it's going to evolve and how it's going to refine and all of those things to just be that much more sophisticated. And what we are also seeing is that they have determined that there is an excess labor pool, right? There are too many of us now that are needed. They don't need to keep feeding us. Between AI and automation, they don't need to keep feeding us. So they're going to extract the absolute last bit of labor that they can out of us, and they're going to let us die. And so we really are at a crisis point that has provided us an opportunity to determine, what are we going to do?
So
That's their plan. What's our plan?
So that brings us to a really good point. We got 10 minutes left,
Sweet.
which is like, the time goes really quick. And that has to do with government, with this entity which is at the center, tying the whole system together. We have a democratic process, but even in autocracies, you've got this center that brings this all together. So in terms of the work that you all are doing now, right? Let's look at sort of the immediate, not outside of that. The role of government, what is it and what could it and should it be? I'm a city councilor and I have only the power to vote as one of 12 and try to influence certain decisions and to get departments and offices to do certain things. But that is something, and we can make dramatic changes. We helped create this entity that we're sitting in right now. We did provide the land as a city to the Onion River Co-op to create the city market, right? We did, I think, actually, Don Jameson, who is the first executive director of the Employee Center, worked at CEDO, right? So, I mean, we've had this role here in Burlington, which I'm very proud of having been a part of that, to say, okay, there are things we can do, but this isn't for me to say, this is for you to sort of share in terms of the role of government as we can imagine it.
I got 3 things for you.
I love it.
I hope I'm not stealing one from you. I'm gonna let you talk about like the difference between incorporating as a worker-owned cooperative here versus elsewhere. So I'm gonna save that one.
Sure.
So here's 2 others.
There you go.
Okay.
Actually, just had a conversation about that today with the
Really?
There you
Good.
yeah, this
so
is
like
great.
let's make
This
sure
is
we
great.
get
We'll go
to it.
we'll
We're
go to
gonna
Matt
get at
next.
it.
We'll go to
This
Matt
is
next.
important. Okay. The second thing is there's nothing that precludes cities, municipalities, and the state government from creating legislation that prioritizes cooperatives in their procurement. Like we must, as a priority, right?
Procurement policy, what we spend our money on.
For all the reasons.
Yep.
We can make those cases to anybody that wants to hear them in more than 10 minutes. And to the Burlington City Council, I will say that in all things, what we allow power to do to other people, they will do to us, right? And I'm going to say this, where's the camera? We over here?
You're
To the rest of the members of the Burlington City Council, pass the apartheid-free resolution for Burlington. For the love of Christmas, like what is even happening that we can't even say that we're an apartheid-free community, that we can't take a stance against genocide? Like what are we even saying? So that's what I would like the government to do in Burlington specifically around a solidarity economy. Because if we're going to allow profit on the backs of genocide and murder of other people, then we're perpetuating those systems that will come home to roost. So I'll be quiet.
No, that's okay. We had that fight a couple of times. I lost
Once or
that fight.
twice.
I
We
lost
won't be
that fight
back.
3 times, but
We'll be back.
All right.
Matt.
So as Michelle mentioned, and I talked to someone today, there's some fiddly bits about the Vermont Worker Co-op Corporation statute that makes it hard to incorporate as a worker co-op corporation in Vermont that we're hoping that in the next legislative session we will get fixed, and that would be lovely. Bigger things. One thing I think, and so the strategy that we pursue, which is this idea that this kind of at the turnover of ownership is a moment of intervention. That's based upon we're all we're all going to die eventually, right?
Eventually.
There's the human life cycle. And so there's this kind of like strategic point that can be intervened at. I think there's a number of things that can make that opportunity stronger. One thing I think is kind of the reach, but I'd love to see, is right of first refusal. Both for, if a company is up for sale, the employees have the right to basically match any offer that the company receives in order to purchase the company instead. And similarly for multifamily housing and mobile home communities, right? We already have some work done in the mobile home communities. Washington D.C. has multifamily housing right of first refusal for housing cooperatives. I think that would make a big difference.
It is a plank of the Progressive Council agenda to have the right of first refusal.
Really important.
And then the other thing I would say is, really, you were talking about money, right? And the government has the ability to marshal financial resources, and right, the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast received money from the CDFI fund, built up over time. It took half a century to get to $60 million in assets, right? So how can we, have these strategic funds that then, once they're established, are not vulnerable to being taken back, but by a more reactionary next administration, but that are permanently these snowballs that are growing and building and increased resources. I think
a
that
progressive
was
sovereign wealth fund.
So one of my biggest lessons from the Burlington Telecom sort of saga, where there was it was privatized, there was an attempt at a cooperative buyout, was that the ability to sort of have, in that case, there's big organizing around the initial co-op, and then it sort of leaked money and enthusiasm as the multi-year process dragged on. Yep. And in retrospect, it was like, what if there had been a way of having each month be something where people were consistently contributing, growing it so that it was stronger and stronger rather than losing momentum. And so I think, the money, we should not discount the importance of financial resources and being strategic about financial resources, and that's something at both the government level, even at the sort of individual level, right? The fact that our 401k plans are specifically designed to mean, in order, you trade future economic security for having no agency with the money that's in there. You can't use that to make a loan to a neighbor so that they can buy housing that they otherwise have to rent, right? So there's these barriers that are put up that could be removed, and there are these resources that can be mobilized.
Right, and some of them are federal, some of them are state. We have a couple of local ones, of which taxation is a piece of it, although the state carries all the cards in terms of even letting municipalities be innovative. And Audrey?
Yeah, in the 2 minutes we have left,
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
really, my big thing, any good political science education is reminding you that no matter what happens, local is the most important. Who is on your select board, who is on your development review board, who's on your regional planning commission, those are like really bringing it down local. What's happening in your actual town? What is happening in your community? What businesses are allowed to build there? I'm really thinking about Dollar Generals across the state, usually in food deserts. Like who are on your development review
Amazon
boards?
and Essex.
Exactly,
Yeah.
like who are on these planning commissions that are making those decisions for you? And usually those are not elected positions. Anyone can kind of just like put their hand up and like put their hat in the ring, especially in rural areas. I would just really encourage everybody to like be uncomfortable and put themselves out there in really getting involved in their municipal governance, because the right is doing that. The right is Moms for Liberty. Steve Bannon was talking about this, putting people in their from their side in these school board positions and all of these positions. Why are we not putting as much emphasis on the municipal level, especially in our rural communities that are more likely to get fired up by the other side? So how are we not seeding that as another place of organizing? So.
And I think that's exactly right. And yet we also have to understand that we, in any of our localities, can't do it alone. Burlington has passed 5 charter changes that are sitting on the wall in Montpelier, right? That have had 60, 70, 90% of the people saying that they want. And they're sitting on the wall, and the governor is saying, no, we're not going to move on them.
Because it's a petty bourgeois democratic structure that doesn't actually represent.
Because we have not mobilized and exercised the levers of power across the board, up and down, inside and outside, right? Because the levers of power are there, they are being pulled. And you know, if you're going to, we have the ability, I think, to change the machines, to make different levers. We're talking about that in a fundamental way, but that requires us doing it from both the governmental and the non-governmental way. Are we out of time? We're darn close to that. I want to thank you guys for this. This is something.
Fun. Thank you.
I told you.
I'm gonna get invited back.
I told you you'll get invited back by me because you know, this has been sort of a life's work of trying to build from the outside, but then also from the in, and then to use both of those powers, which they work together, and you can't do it. So I am really grateful that you came from the kingdom and you came from the road. And say hi to Bill and Trish, because I love them dearly.
And I came from down the street.
And you came from down the street, Matt, which is always helpful. And so I want to thank you for viewing, and we'll try to get this out in as many ways possible, and look forward to next month's, where we'll talk about the Overdose Prevention Center and some other hot topics that we're faced here in Burlington. Thanks very much. Take care.